This is lecture number 10, and we're basically finishing up here on one section talking more about Muslim-Christian relations, talking about the spread of the faith of Islam, and in its spread, it coming into conflict with Christianity quite a bit. Christianity is not the best in this period of time. As we've said before, one of the characteristics was moral weakness. It characterized the church. Priests were not known for their piety or their purity. They were more known for their indulgence. After Constantine opened the door and made Christianity legal in 321, it seemed like Christianity took in a lot of paganism, and there were a lot of people in the church who really didn't love God and didn't follow Christ, but they were called Christians. We know that this trend continued, and these were some of the things that Martin Luther reacted against in the 16th century. The moral weakness of the priests. If you've seen that movie of Martin Luther, the latest one, it was terrible. Some of the priests were into this kind of stuff. There was the monastic ideal, where monks, for example, would climb a tree for 40 years and stay there so that they could avoid the corruption of the world. And this was their idea of holy living. This was the wrong emphasis. It's not biblical. It doesn't help people to see really the change that Christianity makes. That change comes from the inside. But that's one of the things that was going on. And again, Kenneth Latourette, the great historian who taught many years at Yale University, says that this was Christianity's darkest hour. I hope that we've learned our lessons. I hope that we don't repeat this stuff, because sometimes when you look at the church today, particularly the church in our part of the world, we certainly do put up with a lot, and we certainly are not often a good witness. Christians and Muslims were at one another's throats, and as the Muslim empire spread, at one point the second caliph, a guy by the name of Umar, coming after Abu Bakr. You know, Muhammad died in 632, and then his father-in-law Abu Bakr took over for a couple of years, and then after he died, then Umar was the caliph. He was called the Apostle Paul of Islam because he spread the faith, just like Paul spread the faith so well. Umar was a pretty fierce guy, and at one point he perceived that the Christians were gathering arms, and these were the Christians in the southern part of Arabia, in Najran, and he expelled them. He expelled them to the outer coasts. He apprehended their rebellion, it says. And it says again that it's important to note that Caliph Umar did not expel them from the Islamic State, but merely to the bounds of Arabia. And about 3-4 years ago, I was in Yemen, and this is what they told me there too, those who had been there a long time. They said that the Christians were never really kicked out of Arabia, but they were pushed to the margins, and there were buildings there that showed evidence of Jews and Christians. The traditions, this that I just read to you, comes out of Sahih Muslim, volume 3, Kitab al-Jihad. So, Christians and Jews not completely pushed out of Arabia, but not getting along with Muslims. Now, the Judeo-Christian influence was strong, and Muhammad drew from Judaism. He drew from Christianity. He drew from paganism. And you can see it. There is a lot of popular Islam, we call it, spiritual stuff, actually the spirit world of Islam, fear of spirits, jinn, curses, blessings, and all that kind of stuff that's still in Islam. In fact, never was separated from Islam. So you have those influences, but a little bit more about the Nestorians. They were there. They were condemned and kicked out of the church in the AD 431 Council at Ephesus. Ephesus is just above there in Turkey, which isn't too far off from where Muhammad was. And there was Syriac Christianity. Syriac Christianity, it seems like Muhammad pulled the wrong things out of Christianity. In other words, Syriac Christianity had their regular times of prayer, rigid times of prayer, and Muhammad picked that up. He emulated it, and you have today 5 times of regulated prayer in Islam. Muhammad really didn't come up with anything new. He just took from here, a little bit here, and a little bit there, the great contextualizer that he was. And unfortunately, Syriac Christianity was quite rigid and harsh, and so when Islam came in, people more or less accepted it as a savior because they were fed up with the heavy-handedness of Christianity that then existed. The Jews were there, and Muhammad at first they thought they would accept him as prophet, but they knew he wasn't a prophet, and they knew that he didn't know the stories, and so they didn't accept him. And they made fun of him, and they ridiculed him, and so he turned against them. And Jews today are in the Muslim world, but they're diminishing, and it's not a happy situation. So Jewish-Muslim tension has always been there, and for that matter, Christians too are diminishing breed in the Middle East. For example, in a place like Bethlehem, their basic Christians are leaving. That's what's happening in the Middle East. Christians are getting out of there, and that's unfortunate. The Christian presence today, as I've suggested, is all over there. You do have pockets of Christians. I've heard it said, and I think it's true, that there are more Christians in the Middle East than there are Jews in the entire world. Something like, I think, 15 million Christians, Middle Eastern Christians. They haven't been exterminated. They've hung on. They have been discriminated against, and they've suffered. But Islam has put up with them. In other words, Islam, by and large, has not annihilated them. It has treated them as inferiors. But Christian presence is there today. For example, in Egypt, as we saw before, there are quite a few Christians, and Syria and Jordan and other places. Now, let's think a little bit as we finish up this lesson of implications. Think of some of them. Monotheism was there. Where? It was there in the context of Arabia. Muslims will give you the impression that monotheism started with them, or that Muhammad came up with this truth about God. The truth is that monotheism was there. For example, the Jews were there. They were monotheists. Christians also were monotheists, even though they might have been accused of worshiping more than one God. The truth is, Christians believe in one God, and Jews do as well. They were monotheists, and the Hanifs, as we've mentioned before, they were, Muhammad saw them. They were monotheists, and they were pure, and it was a pristine religion. Abraham was a Hanif. But I think the truth is that the Christianity that met the prophet's eye, in other words, that Muhammad saw, was not the best. And this should be sobering for us today. As I've mentioned before, in this lesson and other places as well, we'll talk about it. But the best testimony that we have as Christians is not our numbers, but it's our purity of faith. and of doctrine. And it's not our political structures. It's not our military. It's not the size of our military. It's not whether we're Republicans or Democrats. It's not, that's really not where our power rests. Our power rests in our purity of life, in our holiness of living. And we need to think of that today. May God help us